All right. Well, so talking to Stephen Sherrill, and you are the featured speaker at the North Carolina Writers Network this coming up April. Is that correct? Is
Well,
that
I
the
think I'm one of the participants, one of the speakers. I don't know. I don't believe I'm the featured person. I believe that might be live. I mean, to be honest, like panels and especially any kind of online thing, uh, it's not that I don't pay attention. I've just been doing this kind of thing for a long time that I look at the details when it gets closer to time, but I don't think I'm the featured person. I don't think so.
Okay, gotcha. Well, regardless of that, you are one of the people speaking, and as
Yeah.
I looked into your bio and what you have out there, it looks like I mean, I don't even know where to begin to ask you questions. It looks like you have led a very rich experience as an artist. And I guess the first thing that came to mind was I'd like to maybe we can just start with words and start with this story you wrote that apparently got you kicked out of school temporarily.
Yeah, I mean it's funny that you sort of start there, and I think that was a starting point. I have to step back a second and tell you that I'm in the revision process of a book that I wrote Christmas and fall of last year. It was my 60th birthday was in September, and my final academic sabbatical because I hope to be retired. And I took a motorcycle and a banjo and came south to play at my banjo heroes' grave sites. Uh, and I'm a shitty musician. I'm just not really a musician, but it wasn't about that. And I'm kind of in the process of writing about that. And it's very much becoming a memoir of creative process and how I got there. And and I've just dealt with the time around the time of that story when I dropped out of high school in the 10th grade, and before I got to the point of dropping out, I was just a terrible student, and I had learned how to smoke weed and close everything down, so I wasn't doing anything except internalizing. Right before that, though, I wrote some stories, and I was a kid. I was an adolescent boy, exploring adolescent boy stuff. So I wrote a few stories and showed them to my friends and my teacher. And I remember the comments like, these are kind of violent, but they're good, keep at it or something like that. I think today those stories would have gotten me in a lot of trouble,
Mm.
but that was a long time ago. And then I wrote a story about what every 13-year-old boy wants to know about, which was sex. And I don't really remember the content. I don't recall any of the content, but I knew I shouldn't show it to my teacher. But I showed it to my friends, and somebody was a traitor because it got to my teacher, and my teacher, my parents, and the principal had a conference that I was not present at, and just came out and said I had to go away for 2 weeks. I was just suspended for 2 weeks,
Mm.
uh, and it was traumatizing. But the power and deliciousness of what words could do and the trouble they could cause just never left me. I mean, I didn't write anything again for a long, long time, a long, long time. And I'm sure that was part of it, like embarrassment or shame or whatever. But I never lost that feeling. So, and I think once I started writing again, uh, I dove back into back into the attempts to shock and annoy and all that stuff. I've sort of consciously uh, tried to develop a softer approach over the years.
It is interesting to me how much I think, many artists, not just craftspeople, but particularly artists, I think find themselves inspired by something that you just described. Something that I also noticed in one of your artist statements, just like the power of visibility and transparency and rambunctiousness, I guess.
Yeah.
In one of your artist statements, I noticed you said something like, I used to think it was maybe imperative to have a secret, and I don't
Yeah.
feel that way. And there's something about when I read that, I interpreted it as something like being visible to the world and risking that trouble that you might cause.
Yeah. I mean, I think developmentally it was important because I needed to separate from my childhood, and I had a very loving. My core family was very loving and safe. but one step out to all my uncles, and they were just like crazy Southern redneck drinkers, just wild. And of course, I loved and emulated those guys. There wasn't a lot of expression in any way. The arts just were not part of my upbringing. Like it just wasn't. There was no. There's no. I've lost the word that I want. There was no presence of art or literature except for reading, but even that wasn't reading literature. So when I defined myself as a writer or an artist, like I felt like I had to separate and keep a bunch of stuff in to everybody who wasn't outside of that world. So it's like making this division. And then that kind of filtered out and applied to just life. Like I had to protect some core secret self, both good and bad, to make my way through the world. And as I've gotten older and just, I don't know if wiser is the right word, just more comfortable with everything. Your transparency word is a good one. I think at this developmental point in my life, secrecy is not good, and it's not good for anybody. So I'd prefer just to be completely transparent. Another thing that is happening, especially in the writing of this memoir, transparency for sure, but I have no desire to do like an expose, tell-all story of my relatives and all that stuff. So I want to be transparent, but I also want to be sort of compassionate and protective of things that I don't necessarily need to shine a light on. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too, but I'm not sure.
Well, so it's interesting to me that you went for like, because writing is I think writing it, I don't know about as far as those selective moments where you might not share everything, but writing is a craft of selectively sharing something in a very creative way. And you managed to get, like, it sounds like you started with writing. I think your website said like in 8th grade, and you're talking about 10th grade when you wrote this story that got you that taste of trouble in life. So at what point? So at first, am I right that writing was kind of your introduction into the arts in general?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, I think I have, the realms that I kind of muck around in now are all the realms, like words and visual and sound. I've always been fascinated by music of all kind, and music was present just outside my core family. We listened to a lot, so music was always present, and I have always inexplicably been drawn to visual arts. I mean, the World Book Encyclopedia, I can still remember this, the World Book Encyclopedia, this multi-volume set that, I'm sorry my kids will never have the experience of. I was always looking through P for painting. Like remember looking at Jackson Pollock images when I was a kid with nothing steered me in that direction. So, but all that stuff was just like looking and observing. I was not a musician. I was not a painter or an artist, but I was always looking. It was with words where I found my way to make stuff first.
Yeah.
And then very, very slowly, the other things, became like kind of filtered in, and then took more and more time and focus. And I just started enjoying putting my time. It's like a learning curve of anything. Like when you start something, you're bad at it. And if you don't persist to get to the point of just at least being able to make something that satisfies you, then you just abandon it. Most people do. And I abandoned lots of stuff that way. I kept chipping away at visual art and sound making until now. It has kind of come to this place where I don't really discern between those realms and my imagination. It is just creative process, and I'm just making things. And I'm also far enough along in my professional academic career and in my 60-year-old life. I don't care about the outcome of most things now. I'm just very interested in being in that creative process. Those are the moments in which I feel absolutely engaged in the world. And that's where I want to be. So of course, good things will happen. Most of the stuff will turn out to be nonsense. I don't care about any of it. And it's not that I'm devoid of ego. Like, if somebody doesn't like something, I'll have my little pouty moments, but I just quickly move beyond all that and just go back to making stuff.
Yeah, you're the what I've seen of your stuff. It's like a very kind of Renaissance existence, like a little bit of a lot of things. There's like
Yes.
visual components to the music that you make. There's videos out there that there's like a visual delivery of the music that you make.
Yeah.
I guess like you say it was always there, that interest was always there, but how did you go from maybe not, like not being involved in that world at all to finally kind of jumping in and dipping your toe and experimenting with these things and doing so long enough to like really stick with them? Like what was the initial entry point?
Well, I mean, again, I'm really dealing with all that stuff in the writing of this memoir, and I truly had to grapple with the word memoir. I really dislike that word, and I can't even completely articulate why. So it's taken me a long time to acknowledge that I am writing a memoir slash travelogue, but I'm dealing with that stuff right now. Um, and having just thought about that whole time period of my life, today and yesterday, uh, for whatever reason, my kind of innate response to stress and trauma and struggle and insecurity and doubt is to just take a step forward. I mean, after I stopped drinking and drugging and shutting everything down, once I sort of opened the door, I just move forward and try something and then try something else. So buying I remember buying my first set of paints and paintbrushes, and I was it's like mid to late 20s. I think I just wanted to say I want to paint a picture. And I painted some hideous pictures, but I had some great experiences doing that. Um, Making music was and continues to be the hardest struggle. Like I've always wished that I could perform and make music, to something more traditional or whatever. Uh, and I've hurled myself out in many realms, but that's the one area where the insecurity is always still present. But I've just been hurling myself out and trying things over and over again. So, for instance, um, I think if I could choose one realm in which I would have been successful in, it would have been singing. And my wife is an amazing singer. She tells me I've got a singing voice, and I just don't feel that confidence. I cannot sing. Even with her, I can't sing. But I had, I had, what year was this? Maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. I discovered two musical genres at the same time: shape note singing. Do you know shape note singing?
I can't say that I do.
Or sacred harp. It's an old sacred spiritual music. Like it's a cappella 4 part weird harmonies. Like when we're done, go YouTube sacred harp, and it's you one either loves it or hates it. There's not much middle ground, but I loved it. And I discovered sea shanties uh, through an interview with a colleague and some friends. And I just sent an email to my colleagues at campus. Would anybody like to come to a sea shanty party? So we had a party of probably 60 people at my house singing sea shanties. And I'd never sung in front of anybody before, but I led the first sea shanty. I remember that feeling. I remember, like, what shall we do with a drunken sailor? And I remember it. I remember my dog got terrified and ran all the way around the room and jumped up on the couch. And eventually that led into, for a while, and people still want me to do this, but I'm not interested. I was fronting a shanty choir, like black leather pants with goat hooves and bells on the cuffs, and just absurd nonsense, and me shrieking. Usually by 3 songs in, my voice was gone.
Mm.
But I can't stand up in front of humans with my banjo and sing a quiet song. So I don't really know why that is, and I might get there, I might not. I don't know. I've just always been willing to hurl myself at some wall to see how far I could get through it.
Man,
It's a
that's
long answer for a short question. Sorry.
say what?
So a long answer for a short question. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. I mean that got us to some interesting places. Like uh, I that level of tradition is something that catches me for sure. You know who Stan Rogers is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
One of my Canadian buddies got me onto Stan Rogers and furthered my love for sort of that style of music, especially a cappella music, which I don't,
Oh yeah.
really, I haven't listened to a ton in my life. And he inspired me to kind of think about maybe a play or something around the idea of sea shanties might be like.
So that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's right down my alley, man. I guess like I guess what it brings to mind for me is like the sea shanty thing, the banjo ghost legends thing. It sounds like you're very in touch with the traditions of art, and it seems like there's like the contemporary arts too, and I'm sure that you dabble in those or have your hands in those
Yeah.
somewhere. But I wonder if you like what is if you were just like introducing the idea of the traditional arts to maybe a younger artist, where would you start with explaining the value of the past of like the old knowledge that exists in the traditional arts?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I would try to kind of emphasize that we are on a continuum. There's really that we are on a continuum, or what is that weird mathematical? It's not a helix. It'll come to me in a minute. There's like this sort of self-connecting thing. We got this notion that history is way in the past and the future is wherever that is. And, as practitioners of the arts, I think we kind of step in a Mobius strip. Mobius strip is the word I'm thinking about. It's kind of rolls and connects together. Like we just kind of step into this moment and are able to both reach back and pull those traditions, from however far back we reach, and extend our hand into whatever's, whoever's reaching out ahead of us. The old songs that I was playing at these graves, there's a line that comes from like the upper part of England and Ireland and kind of sweeps down through New England and into Appalachia, and all of that stuff is where most of those old banjo songs come from. Those old ballads, the child ballads, and the I forget the other song collector's name, but there are lyrics from songs that people are still singing today that were sung in Ireland in the 1800s. Just tweaked a little bit, and the melodies changed a little bit, and then of course it gets kind of mixed in with the whole banjo history, which comes from African tradition over. So it's a very much a melting pot, and I think that's the kind of thing I would emphasize for any beginning artist, whatever their medium, is to both look back and see where you are and see where you're going to reach out and hand it off. Like there's no it's important to acknowledge that past, but only in as much as that you can kind of bring it forward. There's a great song, gosh, I'm blanking on the name of it. I need some more caffeine. There's this great example of how folk songs get updated. Omi Wise, Omi Wise? I don't remember the name of the song. There's a very old song that came from the UK, like housed in Appalachia and bubbled up. And a very recent rendition I heard of it. This young man and this young woman made it about O.J. Simpson killing those two people. Like it was Orenthal. It's like perfect fit, but just part of this continuum. So that's I think that's what I would say. Like you are not here or there. You're on this loop, and see where you're going to step in and what you can add.
I like that. I really like that. Has that always been present in your approach to art, or was that something you learned over time?
I don't. I think I probably have learned to talk about it over time. I think I've learned to articulate it over time. But I have, in addition to looking at, Jackson Pollock in the P section of my World Book Encyclopedia, I was also looking at all this classical art. So I've just always, I haven't been one to sort of parse everything out. This is art. These are the schools in here, but this is art. This is music. I also bought, again, inexplicably, at some flea market in Charlotte, North Carolina, when I was probably 13 years old, a double LP of talking African drums. And I played that record until the grooves were out. But I had the same feeling about those rhythms as I did about, everything Johnny Cash did and everything Hank Williams did. I was just never, there was never a distinction between its potential and its pleasure. And I guess the conscious, of course, it took me a while to learn how to articulate that. Consciously or subconsciously, it wasn't very long before I was just looking and reaching all the time. Like I wasn't interested in categorization and exclusion because of that.
Well, I think that opens the door to one of the other main questions I want to ask you. I really want to hear about this motorcycle banjo thing. Like, it sounds so interesting. Sounds like such a big lifestyle choice to do that for a while. I mean, where did that come from?
Well, I don't know. It came from the same. Here's another. Like I'm talking about all this stuff. The idea for that project hit me with the same power and in the same way as the idea for every novel or every poem that's been successful or even the unsuccessful ones. Like it's just a thing that came to my head. And one of the things that I was talking about in my writing up today was that I've spent decades now just cultivating receptivity. Like stream of nonsense in my head is going all the time, and not in a bad way. And I've just learned to pay attention to the things with some energy. And I've been doing that for a long time and cultivating a world and an environment and a lifestyle in which I can do that and get rewarded for it. Now, there's a whole bunch of luck involved. Everybody, I have been very fortunate. But I have two responses to people who say you're just lucky. One of them is I work my ass off and I have failed many more times than I have succeeded. And I have put myself in the crosshairs of luck consciously and actively for longer than I can remember. There are two phrases that are kind of aphorisms or catchphrases that I'm trying to filter in throughout this motorcycle ride book. One of them is, which one should I start with? One of them is, there ain't no notes on a banjo, son, you just play it. Right. And it's all about overthinking. Like I couldn't play the banjo because I was trying too hard to play the banjo. When I just stopped all the nonsense and started making noise, I started having a good time. The other one is you go where you look. Right. And that's like motorcycle wisdom from the get-go. If you're riding into a corner and there's a dead possum in the corner and you think, I better not hit that fucking possum, but you look at that possum, you're going to hit that possum. You go where you look. Well, I have been looking consciously, proactively for a long time now towards a life that I want, a life in which I can do what I want with my imagination and my time. So I'm 21 years into an academic career in which the first 3 or 4 years I had massive success with a couple of novels, and it allowed me to do all these other things. So I just kind of pay attention. And because I paint and make music, I was able to, and we have a program called Integrative Arts. I was able to get my title, Professor of English and Integrative Arts. Well, there's so much bullshit you can put under the umbrella of integrative arts, right? I can propose almost anything. And one day, I guess it was last spring, I was walking around, we were still in COVID, and I thought, and I had just gotten this motorcycle, or had the idea for or I put a down payment on the bike. Like I'd been without a bike for a while. And I thought, I could go for a ride on that motorcycle and take a banjo. And that was it. That was the core of the idea. And then it just kind of developed. And I approached the development of that project like I did with a novel. I was like, all these themes are going to happen. All this actual material has to happen. All this equipment has to happen. And it was just like outlining any other kind of story or project. It was an awesome experience that changed as I did it, but also gave me everything I wanted it to give me. I mean, yeah, I don't know what else you want to know about it. It was awesome.
I'm sure there's a lot more I want to know about that, but as you were talking through that, a different and more personal curiosity, I think, came to mind that I want to ask you about. And it's like, I guess first I just want to acknowledge that, like, there's probably more people in the world that want to be artistic than there are those who are deeply, deeply committed to their crafts, and
Yeah.
I acknowledge that. Uh, Not everybody's gonna like have the same nomadic or successful or free life that maybe they might think another person has. But one thing I want to ask you is like I talk to a lot of artists on this podcast, and a lot of them are in a place where they're basically negotiating with themselves about, I know the kind of life I want to have. I know that I want to be free to create things, but I feel stuck in this, and this is coming from me too. Like I feel this way currently right now. I have a very clear vision of a future that I can imagine that's a lot more artistically sort of available, or available to my artistic side. It's
Yeah.
more fulfilling to my artistic side than what I am finding myself doing for economic reasons. You know, I don't know if like the times may be very different from when you were in your 20s or whatever, or maybe not. I don't know, but I mean, what do you think? What kind of let's just start it there, man. Like, I mean, what when you hear that and you know that there are other artists, young artists out there who are sort of not, they don't feel like they know how to really commit to that lifestyle that really celebrates their creativity.
Yep. I got all kinds of thoughts because I'm thinking about that stuff all the time. So, I mean, my first response has to, I'm very much, man, I don't want to say it like I'm pretty tired of the imaginations of 18, 19, 20, 21 year olds. I've been doing this for a long time, but I can stir it up enough in the classroom that they don't really get that. And I'm still seriously committed to giving them what I think is important. And I do believe that everybody, I think that everybody has the potential for imagination and creativity. That's probably not the case just biologically and psychologically. It's probably not the case, but I act as if. And I think that most of our society serves to consciously or corporately squash all of that, and commodify everything. And if you're not singing on the contest show, then you're not a singer. Like, I think the odds are stacked against, for sure. So I teach to the kind of kid that I was, like a stone bozo sitting in the back who's not quite sure. And if I can just open one door for them, then they maybe can go through. But the deeper answer to your question is one that I think about all the time. Like, and I'll take it back to, you go where you look. Like, I am at this place in my life, which is pretty rich and open, because incrementally I have stepped towards it along the way. It's like when I think about writing a novel, and I love the process, and I'm completely comfortable, and I don't really suffer from writer's block. I don't suffer from writer's block, but I also acknowledge that sometimes a week of eating ice cream, drinking whiskey, and watching Bob's Burgers is writing. Sometimes you just shut down and take it in.
Yeah.
I forgot where it's going. Like, writing a novel. If I sit and consciously try to grapple with that big, long, dark tunnel that is a whole novel, I'd never do it. It would just seem daunting and unassailable. Just couldn't get there. I write a novel one scene at a time, sometimes one sentence at a time. If I'm struggling for a day, I'll set all day for a couple of good sentences, and you build an entire book that way. Well, when I was a kid, and by kid, I mean, 25, 30 years old, trying to step my way into this, I wasn't really sure what the big vision of my life was, but I knew that I wanted to prioritize writing as much as I could. So I cooked a lot, but I was also writing when I could. When I got to Iowa to graduate school, I thought maybe teaching would be something that would allow me this. I didn't get a teaching assistantship. I didn't get anything like that. So I made myself, I proposed a course at the local YMCA, like incrementally. And I tell my kid this, I have a 25-year-old daughter who's kind of trying to find her way. You've got, I feel like it's important to have big picture targets. Like, this is where I want my life to be. but there's a whole lot of space between here and there. And, for the moment, maybe what I need to do is wait tables and, teach one class or take one class or something like that. So I think it's that whole, you go where you look. It's important to, well, you go another motorcycle analogy. When you're going through this turn and there's a dead possum on there, you shouldn't even be looking at the turn. You should be looking at the apex of the end of the turn so that you know where you're going to end up at. So you got this notion of where you want to end up at, and you're always aware that that dead possum is there. So it's like incremental steps. Like if I want, and my days aren't perfect. My life isn't perfect. There's lots of stuff I'd rather do. When I'm having a particularly shitty day, I'll come back as tightly as possible and focus on something that I can do right now that's going to help me through this moment. And everything is always in flux. Some days are going to be good. Some days are going to be bad. The bad days, I'm constantly tightening my focus and trying to get one thing that I can. And acknowledging that sometimes sometimes a day, you just give up and can't do anything. And that's part of the creative process. That's an important part of the creative process, that I don't kick myself when I, spend 3 days watching bad movies, Japanese movies on TV.
Yeah. I think that's really great to hear from you because, in some of the conversation, I think I mean, I've had relationships with artists for a while, and I know, and I've felt it myself too, that it can feel this particular kind of devastating to know that what you want to do is, I wish all my time was dedicated to this thing. And on one hand, when you don't feel like that is your reality, sometimes it's not motivating to do the thing for some reason.
Yeah.
Sometimes even when you have the free time, it's like that's a whole different subject, I guess. It's like,
It's like, why bother, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like another, and then we can change questions if you want to, like another, I think that outside of my family and the kind of key things to keep me alive, I prioritize my creative energy and space above everything else. Everything else. And it's pretty easy to see when one starts looking, that this is kind of there's like a little bit of a Buddhist element in here, that all of the worry and the doubt and the fear and even the sort of ego-driven hopes and aspirations, all of those are something outside of process. And whatever I'm feeling, like if I'm feeling all this deep insecurity, or my head's so big that I can't get through the door, I'm not present in making a thing. So I found that a good strategy for me is to just come back and make something. Just come back and make a paragraph, or make some noise on a banjo or whatever, or synthesizer or whatever else. Like and it is very much Buddhist practice, in that only the most advanced and enlightened monks can just stay there all the time. The doubts are going to creep in, but I do think it's like a muscle. It's a practice. You can get better at just coming back and focusing on the thing, and the next day is going to be something different. Just always coming back to that thing that validates has been my strategy, and that's what I try to encourage my kids to do, and anybody who asks me those kinds of questions. I mean, it's so incredibly easy to talk about the writing of a novel and spend all that energy so that you don't actually have to sit and write a novel or a song or a painting. Like, it's very, very easy to talk about the struggle of painting, or how this is going to be the best book in the whole world. If none of those is actually making the painting or the book.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
That reminds. Let's see. Recently, I heard or saw something about. I can't remember what the context was, but it stuck with me. It was something to do with, like, maybe in pursuing something, maybe letting go of the idea of an objective compared to maintaining a relationship. And I've been thinking about that in many contexts.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about it kind of in the terms of what you've been describing, like creative process versus maybe the objective of being arriving at some place of like I am a professional songwriter and that's all I do with my time, but
Yeah.
rather like enjoying that relationship with your own self, with your creativity. Also in terms of like relationships with people. I mean, I think this distinction is important in a lot of different places.
I agree.
But it sounds like, yeah, as you were talking about your sort of creative process, that's like it kept coming back to me. Like, I wonder when this sort of the objective of the professional status of a musician or an artist or whatever. I wonder when that came to be. Like when you were coming up in the arts and among other artists, was it that same draw? Was it because you when you talk about it, you sound like it was a lot more about I want a particular lifestyle more so than I want people to perceive me as a successful so and so. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
I think that's accurate. Yeah. I mean, I just I want to be comfortable in my making. I mean, um, um, I mean, I think everybody struggles with identity. Of course, I want to be seen as a writer and and even, I want to be seen as a motorcyclist and a banjo player and all this stuff. But I don't know when I was able to make this shift into rather than I want to be into I want to do.
Yeah.
That's where I kind of dwell right now. I don't, it's like an easier analogy is in the musical realm. Like that's always been a place where people have and sounds have been commodified and sold, and actual players have been exploited so that other people can make profit. I think the art world, the visual art world, I don't know how much you know about the nonsense of the contemporary art world, but it's just stupidly political and outrageously just way too much money. And it's all about ownership and commodifications, nothing to do with making. So those two realms where things can be sold are they're clearer. It's just much more transparent how vapid and money driven it is. I think it's probably different in the world of words because it's a writer's very personal thing. um yeah, I don't know how to answer the question you're answering, but or you're asking, but it's
Do you get the sense that there's a different level of maybe the do you think that the level of pride people might take in the perception, like what you were getting at? I think some people do think that if they, I'm not trying to sound super whatever, like critical of how people are. It's just like, but I remember, and I see it in my own tendencies. Like it's way more likely that I am talking about the concept of my new album or something than it is that I'm like working my ass off to get it done.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like sometimes that belief, that conceptualization sort of period is something that I confuse with actually being the creator, which it's not like it's unimportant, but what seems to be more important is the real action of getting down in the nitty gritty.
I think you're right. I mean, I think you're right also in that developmentally as an artist and even as a person, like to be able to conceptualize and kind of put on those suits and those hats and whatever. I think that's an important developmental stage to getting towards this comfort of of doing and it becoming kind of flawless. I realized a long time ago, I'm the stuff that I write is just not going to be commercially uh top of the charts. It's just not going to get there, and that took a lot of pressure off. Like I don't have to think about that. I've had enough success that if I don't write anything else, I'm all right with that. It means that I probably will, or if I don't, I just don't know. If I publish another book, great. If I don't, I'm satisfied with all that. But that's letting go of this. uh I don't mind. I don't mind my failures being visible. Like I don't mind all the whole process being visible.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, okay, so we can change gears. But I really appreciated that because I feel like, some of the people I know that watch this show are younger artists, and I think the things that you've said are, really great to hear. So
And
I
they're you know they're sort of hard won. Like I have worked to get to this place, and there are cracks in my facade sometimes. Like sometimes the negative stuff creeps in. So I would never want to present myself as, you know, this uh, enlightened artist.
For sure. Yeah, I get that. But I think, you know, yeah, just I mean, from the outside looking toward you, I mean, you seem like it's that level of focus and commitment. I think that I'm getting from our conversation toward being like committed to the life you want to live. I mean, that's the hardest decision for a lot of people to make. Is like, it's a lot easier sometimes to say, yeah, I know what life I want to live, but like, how am I going to make money? How am I going to have dental insurance and stuff? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's a sacrifice a lot of people decide to make.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you who some of your banjo heroes are.
That was a hard list to make because I've got a lot of them. I initially made this list and was headed all the way down to Mississippi for um, oh my God, what's his name? I definitely need more caffeine. Um, he sang Bo Weaver, Charlie Patton. Charlie Patton? I think it was Charlie Patton. But in the end, Charlie Patton was more of a guitar player. So the people I ended up visiting, I'll tell you in order. And there are so many others that I would have visited, but I had to, you know, the realist in me steps in. Plus, I was riding a fairly modest little motorcycle, 650 cc's. Is, you know, not the most comfortable thing. So I visited Roscoe Holcomb in Kentucky. I visited Doc Boggs in Virginia. I visited Uncle Dave Macon in Woodbury, Tennessee. I visited Bascom Lamar Lunsford in just north of Asheville. Tom Clarence Ashley, also up near Asheville or Mountain City, Tennessee. And then back to my home state of North Carolina, I visited the hardest grave for me to find, the most fringe player, this old African-American man, Dink Roberts. Just very fringe, very raw, but his sound has moved me since the first time I heard it. And then the last grave I visited was not a player, but it was a famous, very famous murder victim, Omi Wise. So I went to Omi Wise's grave and sang Omi Wise to her, and yeah, it was pretty awesome.
This is the
A
coolest.
tiny little banjo. What?
This is the coolest project I've ever heard of. I
It
think.
was so fun. I mean, and there was a lot of um, there were a lot of changes in the nature of the project along the way that are kind of informed by the stuff that we've been talking about. You know, I of course I had these fantasies that, you know, part way along the way I would become a YouTube superstar and people would be following me. And then I just kind of stopped making those videos along the way because I fell in love with writing about the project, and I hadn't written the book in a while. In fact, I was saying I might be done writing because it's too much of a pain, but I fell in love with writing. So I stopped crafting little videos at night to put up, you know, for my whatever fan base I had. I still recorded everything at the graves, but I'm coming to the conclusion that I do not want to be a performing musician. I'm not there yet. I'm not quite ready to give it up yet. It doesn't mean I'll ever stop playing music and making just nonsense noise with friends, but that trip kind of led me to something else. So I've got all this footage. You know, I've got riding footage that only motorcycle people would be interested in. I've got 3 different camera views of me at all these weird grades and all these weird situations. Yeah, it was very fulfilling, and also long, like 21 days, 2,500 miles on a 650cc motorcycle. Of those 2,500 miles, probably 2,200 were curvy mountain roads. So I was ready for some straight roads by the time I got home.
So I hate to admit that I am not familiar with a lot of these names that you've listed. Are these all of a similar banjo playing style, or are they all kind of different?
There's a whole bunch of overlap, and a whole bunch of overlap in their degree of presence in the world of music, old time music. For instance, uh, Bascom Lamar Lunsford, who's Asheville based, you know, and they're all in, you know, born late 1800s, died by the mid 1900s, and many earlier than that. So their time frame is the same. Uh, Bascom Lamar Lunsford was a lawyer, an Asheville, North Carolina kind of muckety muck, also a horrible racist and anti-Semite, I believe. But I will address that in the book. I wasn't about the politics of these people. I was about their sound. But he was really, really important in what was the festival called? I mean, it was an Asheville, North Carolina festival in which he did the thing that we were talking about early in this podcast, like carrying tradition even from further back and kind of keeping it alive and vibrant. So he's really instrumental in that. Uncle Dave Macon is Tennessee, like the first Grand Ole Opry kind of star, and also a rabble rouser. Like I would say he's kind of the possibly the Marilyn Manson of the band, just a rowdy, big gold tooth and flamboyant. The other couple of players or 3 or 4 players are just hard hit working class coal mine, and music for them. It was about it was pulling stuff out of the coal mines and out of the coal mines all the way from across the ocean and sort of keeping it alive. And then there was Dink Roberts, who there's not much, like his was the grave that was hardest to find. There was no grave marker, and I was told that, but that his wife probably had a grave marker. And I pull up into this church, and this is North Carolina, the end of the trip, and I was tired, and there were 3 churches there in this within a couple of blocks. One of them was derelict and back at the back, and I thought, all right, that must be it. And I went back to the church, and there were really kind of 3 little graveyards, and I walked around all of them, and I didn't see anybody, I didn't see his name or his wife's name. And I thought, well, I'm just going to set up and do my stuff here. Like I had a whole ritual that I did. And I kind of started getting my gear out, and then I saw past this pretty large tree, a little like a cut away in some brush, and there were a handful of graves back there, and there were a bunch of graves lined with cinder blocks, big blocks, but then off to the side there were just 2 graves lined in bricks. They didn't even get cinder blocks; they just got bricks. And his wife was named in one, and I felt that indentation was him. And his music is raw and old, and he giggles a lot. And you just, like, if you look for him on YouTube, Dink Roberts, he's got this look in his eye that I saw in my grandfather's eye, and I feel like that has something to do with my draw towards him. His music is very raw and ragged. I'm also drawn to that. So all these people that I talk about, and even the ones I dismissed, in the world of old time music, most of them are pretty well known, and that's a pretty rich subculture. There's lots of, like, nationwide, and even in the UK and Europe, there's a big subculture of old time. Really, there's a subculture of everything. It doesn't. If you name something, there's some group of lunatics who are obsessed with it.
Right. What about what can you tell me on I don't want to get too personal, but like spiritually, I'm curious about this, because that probably is a different realm for a lot of people as far as what it all means. But I mean, I guess can you talk at all about, like, maybe what your belief is about what is happening here in this space where you in this physical form are going to these places where these bodies are resting? Do you feel like you're like having do you feel as though you're connecting with them, like, in a real way?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like that is a question that I get. Like, what? In fact, the Clarence Ashley's grave. Because I believe in asking and just sort of seeing, I had made this connection with someone who grew up in the area and was part of the musical realm. And I said, I'm looking for a place to stay. So I ended up staying at his house. Do you know the name Doc Watson? Do you know his name?
Yeah.
So Doc Watson played with Clarence Ashley. So I stayed in the house in which Doc Watson and Clarence Ashley sat on the porch for hours and hours and hours playing. And I felt the ghosts of those guys, man. I really, really felt it. But their relatives were there. And that was the most social event that I had for the entire trip, and had these great conversations. But this one woman said, did you feel anything there? And yes, like I, you know, um, like I am a non-believing. I'm even would even call myself an anti-theist. I think that religion has done more harm than good. Right? I'll go ahead and say that. Uh, don't really believe in ghosts or supernatural stuff, but I believe in ghosts and supernatural stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just fun, and part of my flow and my process, I'm just willing to go there for the sake of this experience and narrative and story. So there's going to be a ghostly presence in this thing, and I felt it. I scientifically don't believe it, but I felt it, and I don't care to differentiate between those two. So, um, the title of this, I don't know if I even put that on any information that anybody could know yet. The book title that I'm writing right now, if it sticks, will be called Motorcycles, Minotaurs, and Banjos, A Modest Odyssey. And it is this kind of spiritual journey into, out of, like, I equate minotaurs and banjos. They're both mongrels. They're both rowdy outsiders. The banjo players are often just hard heads. They're those guys. And that's where I came from. So I'm definitely equating this kind of outsiderness, and the Minotaur character that I have written about for 20 years now is not a fierce beast. He's a sad old guy who cooks in a restaurant and has a big fat tongue so he can't speak. So this notion of feeling like you're the freak in the room with horns and your tongue is too thick for you to speak, it goes hand in hand with playing banjos to me. And all of the players that I went to visit, even the successful ones, either came from or never escaped that fringe outsiderness. Does that make sense? Yes. And so I'm trying to, it's like the continuum that we're talking about. I'm trying to sort of just tap into something that's already present and ride it for a while.
Yes, yes, sir. I mean, I feel like we have more in common than I think I realized when we started the conversation. I was a pretty avid anti-theist for a while, and I think a lot of what you're describing is what has made that not as much part of my life. Almost exactly what you said. Like, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in spirituality, but I enjoy believing in it, and I don't feel the need to make that distinction.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you, man. And I think it's not necessarily in a religious way, but mythology in almost every sense of it, including religion to some degree. Like, I think the mythological, the belief aspect of what it means to use symbolism to explain how you want to try to interact with the world, I think is like a fascinating, beautiful thing sometimes. And I do think it's exactly a part of what you're talking about, a part of tapping into the traditions within art and carrying them forward in some kind of way.
I mean, it's a thing that we have done since before we were language beat creatures. We have used symbols, and we will always do that. And when I first claimed the title atheist and then went into anti-theist, I was adamant and sort of proselytized. I love to use religious words in an atheistic way. I'm a devout atheist and a proselytizing anti-theist, and that was about learning. We were talking about this earlier. That was me kind of figuring out my role and my identity. And the reality is, I don't want to take away anybody's comfort. I don't care. I don't care what kind of nonsense you believe in. As long as you're not telling me, who I can marry and who I have to kill, which it comes down to that often. I don't care what you believe and whatever. I do whenever I sort of sneak it in, though, whenever inevitably in any creative writing class, there's the opportunity to talk about some Bible story. And I always say, in the Christian mythology, I always sort of get that in there, and it's going to resonate with some of them it won't. But that's enough for me. I don't need to push them any further than that. Yeah. And then I'm willing to talk about anybody who's interested in changing their beliefs. I have no interest in arguing with someone about the validity or solidity of my beliefs. If you want to come from your Christian belief system into what I think is the right one, let's talk about it. Don't try to convince me of anything.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So then there's the problem of gospel music because it's so damn good.
But it's so good. Well, again, it's like I say this, I've said this so many times. I do have this condition. It's not really a condition, but it seems pretty real. I have a hard time understanding lyrics in almost every song.
Huh.
I really do, unless they're really precise and clear. Uh, I don't know, and maybe I'm embellishing a little bit of that, but I have the same. It is possible for me to get the exact same pleasure, deep, focused pleasure out of these old gospel songs and a Lil Wayne rap song. Like it's the sonic experience that I'm after. Now, having grown up in the South and in a church, I don't think I've been able to completely like squash the sentiment of some of those old really weird gospel. Did you grow up in church?
I did, yeah.
What kind of church?
A Baptist church.
So you know the song "Just as I Am," walking up to the altar. Yeah, it's like I can't help but like that. There's a little weird trickle in there, and it's a ridiculous experience, but it's going to be there. So I'm not completely able to separate all that stuff. But the music I was telling you about earlier, sacred harp stuff. Like when we're done, if you, I'll send you an email to remind you. You have to look up sacred harp and also Fisherman's Friends sea shanties, and there's a movie about those guys. They're awesome. But sacred harp is just, I mean, it's purely sacred, like Baptist fire, hell, slam on the, the Lord's going to smite you down. But I love all the sound. And I am absolutely able to compartmentalize all that meaning with the sonic experience. I mean, with shape mode in particular, which is gospel stuff, there's a pretty big subculture of that too, all over the country, all over the UK and Europe. And it's in the Eastern corridor here of the US anyway, it's pretty deeply, the young people are lots of Jews. So they're able, they're able to parse that out and have the sonic experience. They're not there singing about the Lord, they're there singing. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm able to do that. But as a storyteller, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little excited. As a storyteller, those old gospel songs do some great stuff, So I am also interested in seeing how that works and exploring that. So I respect a thing. Like there are many elements. There's the content, there's the sound, and then there's the craft involved, right? And all of those are functioning together. The meaning of those lyrics are the least important of those things to me, and I can easily dismiss that. And the same goes true for the worst, nastiest rap music. Like I like all of that stuff too. So for the same reasons.
Yeah, yeah. But that is particularly interesting because you're a writer too, and I wonder if that what does that have in common with the way that you view, like the way that you approach writing a novel? Like, is it more about is writing a novel for you about the sort of like almost the linguistic experience also more than the meaning necessarily of the words?
No, that's a very interesting point, Tyler. So how am I going to get here? For me, rare is the song that moves me at the literary level and the sonic level. Right? I'm willing to forgive schlocky, sentimental, bad, whatever songwriting for the sake of the sonic structure, even if it's just, the syllabic sounds the mouths are making. I have said more than once, and I don't think this is going to change. I don't think I have anything to contribute, or possibly even the skill to contribute to the world of good songwriting. I just don't think I have that. And I don't feel the lack. It's not like I'm feeling bad about it, because I'm pretty good with words in other realms. But it's an interesting, what's the word I would use? Like it is a point. It is a point that words are probably the most important thing to me, and their meaning and their construction, their order, all of that. And the meaning is very important, except in the realm of songs.
That is so interesting to me.
I don't really know why. I mean, I think it might even be, there might not be much depth there. It might be for the sake of just expedition, like just allowing me into the music. Like I do my word stuff over here. I don't need to do it in this realm. Right. There are occasionally songs that just kick me hard with the words and the meaning. Um, but those are few and far between. But music and song in general is unparalleled in how important it is to me. So I don't know. It's an odd thing, but it's not a thing I struggle with. Like I just don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super interesting. Music does serve a particular purpose. The fact that there's a sonic element to it at all differentiates it from the purpose of pure literature. So
Yeah, yeah,
I can
yeah.
definitely see why it would be in a slightly different category for you, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we sing, when we were doing the shanty choir business and performing and the shape note stuff, there are lots of poignant moments, big epic narratives that happen in these songs, but but mostly for those things, like there's some of them that really get me, but some of them it's just the resolution of the sound or the foot stomping chorus, all this stuff. It's just rarely the words.
Yeah. Well, so we've been going for about an hour. I don't want to keep you from caffeine all day long.
We can
But
go a little longer if you want to. We can, whatever you.
yeah, we can find a couple more questions, I think. You had said something, I guess, when we first started getting rolling about, I guess you don't find yourself in North Carolina very often anymore. You're up in Pennsylvania. I guess what's your, I guess, moving things to your modern life and whatever you're up to. I wonder what I don't know exactly what to ask you, but I'm curious, I guess, maybe about your routines with creativity as it stands now, and if your community there in Pennsylvania has been a positive network in that regard.
It's been very odd. I didn't know anything about Pennsylvania when I moved here. I left North Carolina and I turned 30 my first semester in Iowa. And I haven't moved home since. I've been home. My family's still in North Carolina. Um, but this was the Penn State University and the Altoona campus, which is about 35 miles south of the main campus, was my only real job offer. Once I was able to put novel forthcoming on my application, I got an interview, I got the job, and moved here kind of blind. But it has been just remarkably supportive and encouraging in every realm. Like early on, the first couple of years, that first novel of mine came out, and then it was a little bit of a fairy tale story. Like there were reviews all over this nation, and 7 or 8 translations. It's still in print after 20 some years. And then my second book had a little bit of a splash, but not much. But it just paved the way for academic freedom. And then recently, my wife and I have moved up to the main campus, in which we just got a very rich community of people who love to eat and drink and make noise with us. It's just fun. So yes. I mean, I'm not far from retirement because I want to retire, and that really doesn't mean not working. That means working more. That means me not having to do anything for students. I'm making strange videos that, and I just found myself in a nice puddle of creativity and very supportive. And my routine now is, because I haven't been in a classroom since spring of 19. When COVID first hit, they shut down everything, made it virtual. And I stayed virtual all last year simply because I didn't want to drive to campus. And I've been on sabbatical this past year. So for the past 2.5 years, my routine is just I do whatever I want to do and make work. And it's been very successful. And not of it. And successful only means I make stuff. I don't, whether it goes anywhere. Like I've won a couple very short story contests. Yeah, I'm just making stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a video on your website, or maybe it was your one of your channels or whatever. But
Vimeo. There's some weird stuff on Vimeo.
one of the ones that stood out the most was you guys, three musicians in buffalo masks.
That's a Minotaur. Those are Minotaur masks. They're supposed to be, but they're actually buffalo masks. That was just last spring. That was maybe even last fall. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I was very curious about what you are accessing there, like what that expression is all about or whatever. And maybe it's not useful to like put things too, like explain those things too much, but I guess I wondered what was like, what you felt like sharing about that.
Well, the biggest thing was it was just a boatload of fun. That was in Rochester, New York. I've got some comrades up there who were just equally free in their expression, and it was totally unplanned. Like my friend who played the saxophone in that said, I mean, he's a brilliant fringe element weirdo, way on a spectrum, but so much fun, and this deep well of trivia and knowledge, particularly about Rochester, which is a richly weird town. So that parking lot that we were in, my friend Tom, grew up in Rochester, and that parking lot was the parking lot of one of the most important jazz clubs of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So my friend Tom just said, let's go play something at this parking lot. And then my friend Harold, who was playing the drums, said, why don't you bring those masks? And then I decided to bring my banjo, and it was totally unplanned. It was all free. It was all, what's the word? Improv. Like we were just making noise, knowing that it was going to be a lot of fun. So that's it. There's nothing other than something weird is going to happen here. Let's document it. And in the end, it sounded pretty good. And we called ourselves, what do we call ourselves? Oh, in fact, I need to go back up there and do it again. I think, and you have to say it slow, oil hole. Exactly. That's it. Exactly. We are oil hole, and you have to say it really, really slowly. So you've reminded me that I have to go back. So there was no significance there other than let's make this weirdness. And that's the best for me. There's just no pressure. And then we went to the same weekend, and I believe that's probably second on that Vimeo list, to this awesome graveyard in Rochester, in which, oh my God, these two very important people, the Susan B. Anthony and this very important African-American dude, are buried there. But we ended up being allowed, because I said, could we go in and sing? We went to a defunct crematorium on the graveyard and sang this Sacred Harp song, which is on there also. So you'll hear Sacred Harp, but it's only in one part. It's really just hurling oneself into the absurdity, because nothing's going to kill you. And if it does, then you're dead.
That sounds to me like the freedom element that you've been hinting at and getting around. And do you know Steve Wisniewski?
No.
He's a guitar builder, banjo player, old time guy around here.
How do you spell his last name?
I think he goes by Steve Wish a lot of the time, but it's, I think, WISHNEV Nev SK.
That'll get me close.
I or something. Yeah.
Google will do lots of wonders with that closeness.
Yeah, you'll also find him if you look up Wish Bass.
Okay. But Wish space or bass?
Bass, like upright bass.
Okay.
He's a very cool guy. Probably a lot in common. He's a writer, smart dude, instrument maker, old time dude. But he said something to me one time that really stuck with me. I was like 20. I was probably 21 or 22, and I don't know, pontificating about being a songwriter and being like, yeah, man, I've been trying to write songs, but I've got writer's block or something, which was just horseshit. And he said to me something like, songwriters, sometimes they just give themselves too much credit. Like, they think that the things they make are them, and most of it's on accident. And I was like, damn, I think he's right. And then I went home and just started writing, and like all that stuff, whatever it was that was keeping me unfree, kind of went away. And when you talk about that, and that's why I said some of these things don't need explanation, because sometimes in creativity, that's all it is. It's not like you have to have this grand explanation for everything you do. Some of it is just surprising and fun and exciting.
Yeah. I mean, a significant way that I have to understand that you're talking about is, like, I wrote this first novel that made my whole life and has allowed me to do all this other things and still doing stuff. Uh, but when I was writing that book, I couldn't have articulated and explained and expressed all the things that that book's about. I just could not. It took me years of answering questions for interviews to be able to say, I think this is happening here, here, and here. If I had thought about all that shit while I was writing the book, it would have never gotten on the page.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's again going back to the word freedom. I think that also happens intellectually. It's like the freedom when you yeah, when you box in your ideas and have to be able to explain everything in perfect language
Yeah.
before you really go through the process of discovering what it is you're doing. That's
Yeah.
kind of the opposite of that freedom, I feel like.
Yeah. 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 It's funny. One of my best friends up here is a philosopher. Uh, like one of my greatest friends up here, and he's a deep, rich guy and interested in all this other stuff. But there's this philosophers always have this kind of filter of idea and concept. I'm like, don't think about it. God damn it, just do it. But he's a lot of fun to cook with and drink with. So
I know exactly what you mean. I have a friend of the similar discipline, and yes, everything is very. It is a serious conversation.
Yes, yes.
But my philosophy friend is also a banjo. Well, no, he's a guitar player and musician, so he gets a little bit of that. Is yours also a musician in some way?
He's a like a stereophile. He's got this exquisite equipment. He doesn't play. I think his his realm of creativity is uh, Warhammer gaming and painting little figures. He's a complicated, brilliant human being, but he doesn't make. He's a big appreciator of the making and all of my weirdness. He just loves, and and again, we're both big foodies. Like we just bought and shared, like bought a pig. We each bought half a pig, so we're gonna spend a lot of time eating pork this summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't make, and I don't. I have the hardest time. He gets fulfillment lots of other places. The people I have the hardest time being with or understanding are people for whom there doesn't seem to be any creative process or desire for it or appreciation for it. I just don't understand people like that and don't quite know what to do with them.
Yeah, it's a different type of person for sure.
It is. It is. It is.
I think I want to ask you at least one more thing. I want to
Sure.
revisit this idea of the which was it? Did you say Minotaur?
Yeah. 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 But the Brits pronounce it Minotaur,
Minotaur. I want
but
to.
I say Minotaur.
Minotaur. Okay. I just wanted to ask you one more time, maybe what it sounds like that is a particular fascination with yours, like you identify with that symbol. And you had mentioned it being in the realm of the outsider. And I wondered
Yeah.
if you could just maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Oh, sure. I mean, in fact, I mean that question will circle back to lots of things we've talked about. I think that um, early on as a writer, I think that writers and musicians and artists kind of channel things. I think you drop things in, you don't have to think about it; it's just you're sort of coming through you. I think that Minotaur character, as I have identified him, and even true to the mythology, is a beast that didn't ask for his role. He was, he was the spawn of some badness, some gods and mortals badness, and then he suffered for it, and was just a beast and a demon, and he had nothing to do with it. And I took him out of this labyrinth. And in classical mythology, he was killed, but I hope to kind of make an explanation in my book as to why he didn't die. But I put him as a what does it mean when you live forever, eternal, undying? I'm losing words because I need caffeine, but he doesn't die. There's a word for that I can't remember. But he just got more and more tired and more and more tired, and had to find a way to live forever, and getting more and more tired and less powerful. So he became a cook in my book, and a Civil War reenactor, and a mechanic. And I think that book resonates, the one that I wrote 20 years ago, because everybody knows what it feels like to feel outside and not quite able to express. I think that's the resonating quality, right? And so over the years, I learned how to talk more about that and identify where I was doing things subconsciously. And I didn't think I was ever going to write another Minotaur book, but he came back to me in a way that I was interested in. So I followed him. So I have two novels about this Minotaur. There's an opera with a where is he at, in Wales or Scotland? This opera that I wrote the libretto for, and it's gotten close to being performed. I don't know if it ever will. Is this notion of an outsider, a former beast kind of stripped of his ferocity and just made more human than most humans. So I just started playing with all of that stuff. And now he's kind of crept up in my visual art and in my music and all this stuff. So the way I would loop it back to all the other things we're talking about is it's like creative shortcutting. And I don't mean that in an easy way. Like, this is a vehicle in which I can put a lot of valid, viable stuff, right? And I can just go with this Minotaur character to see what he does in this realm, or I can go with this Minotaur character to see what he does in this realm and how he can evolve and change. So I just have found it to be like a ready-made, motorcycle for me to hop on and ride into creativity. It's just a place that I can go. And who's to say, maybe if I'd let him go and gone in a different direction, I would have been more commercially successful. I don't really know. And I don't really care, because he's a place I like to go to. I do other things as well, but he's an easy place for me to go to, because all the characters that made me feel affinity for the Minotaur are still present in my life, even if I've learned how to navigate them. And I don't think that significance of feeling alienated and outsider is ever going to be a condition that goes away from our society. I think there's always going to be present. So he's just an easy guy for me to, grab his hand and run down the road with.
I find that really fascinating because I think artists already by default it's hard to speak extremely generally about the condition of artistry and the condition of creativity and what it all means, but
Well, it's easier when we participate in it. So when we do, so we can make some generalizations.
I totally agree. And in my experience, I've been toying lately with this idea of individuality, and how individuality and creativity, I think, are linked in some kind of way. At least I always notice that when I distance myself from things that feel too stagnant, or everybody's too similar, if they all think this way. I mean, my relationship with religion, I think, is part of this. It's like if we're all just kind of subscribing to one way of being or one way of thinking, I don't feel individual enough, and that often sometimes is part of what inspires my need to use words and use music to express something individual. And a symbol like that, like a mythological symbol, I think is just so fascinating, that an artist such as yourself can maybe find your own personal meaning in that thing and use him as this way to access that whole process of your life and your path and your ideas and stuff.
One that has like a universality. I think that I can't, I'm sure there are other cultures in the world that would maybe argue with me, but I think that almost everybody would have something to relate to in this character, right? But it's not like I'm transgressing. And especially in this day and age where you just can't speak for anybody else or whatever, I'm so glad I'm at the end of my writing career in this time where everything gets challenged. And right. So if I had written from the perspective of a Black man or a gay man or whatever, all these challenges are going to come my way.
Yeah.
Well, who's going to say that about the Minotaur, right? Nobody.
Right.
Right. So I've got this ready-made access to universal feeling and experience. And I'm just going to keep going with it, or, and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. I'm glad that I got to get a glimpse of some of your stuff before talking with you, just to do some research and have some points of reference. But after talking with you, I'm looking very forward to diving way further into all of your stuff, all of your projects that you've done.
The Vimeo stuff is insane and fun. The one of the things that I did over the at the very beginning of COVID, all of our access to friends and communal stuff shut down, and my brain didn't stop. So I started just like reaching out for just collaborative projects. So I think I have 5 or 6 things on my Vimeo channel where I would either propose a sound or maybe give them a sound or give us some visuals. So this really great collaborative and free form, like nothing other than my kind of wanting to see what kind of narrative. I'll send you those in particular so you can look at them. Some of them are great. And one of the most successful, I think, is called Autobiography of the Minotaur. Right. And it's so funny. I think it's funny. It's a bunch of my family movies when I was a little guy, some bullfight stuff, and then like brilliant, really successful musicians across the country and some in the UK just making this noise. And they'd give me all these sounds, and there were no rules. I just put the sounds together like I wanted them. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And we're going to have a showing of those at a local arts center soon.
In Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Yeah, but they're all on Vimeo, so you can go look at them if you want.
You have any plans to do any releases or anything, like anything in North Carolina? Any drive to do that at all?
You mean sound stuff?
Any shows, any whatever, any live events?
One of the reasons that I've been able to be so productive and so fluid is that I don't put my energy toward promotion. Any of that stuff. I mean, I would love it, but somebody's going to have to invite me down and do all the organizing because I don't want to do it. You know, there's Bandcamp and SoundCloud stuff. All the sound is there, but if I never had to do another book tour or like, I like art shows, but to it's just so much of a pain in the ass to send stuff out. Like, I don't. Yeah. I'd rather go downstairs and make something. Like I'm trying to make a stop motion thing now with my little crazy Minotaur. I made this weird little Minotaur puppet, and I'm excited to start that. I've got a friend who collaborated with the sound, but that's going to take a lot of time. So any kind of promotional stuff is going to take away from the hours I'd have to spend shooting my little Minotaur figure moving incrementally.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, that's like what I get. I didn't get in this to be a professional social media manager. I got in this to be creative, and not that, that realm can be creative or whatever, but that's a part of the modern approach to art that I think kind of sucks sometimes, is how much that keeps you from deep creativity.
Yeah. No, you come visit us in Pennsylvania and we'll make noise and look at movies and do weird shit, but I'm not driving anywhere unless anybody arranges it for me and makes it quick.
On that note, I'm going to plan a trip to Pennsylvania and come hang with you sometime.
Yeah, you're welcome, man.
Well, I mean, hell, Stephen, I think we covered a lot of great stuff. I think we can wrap it up, but man, I'm very excited about all this. I'm excited to do a deep dive of more of your creations, and I hope your speaking goes well with the North Carolina Writers Organization.
It will. I mean, I one of the things I told Ed when he asked me this, like I have no interest in lecturing. I don't believe in I'm not going to spout at anybody. So I'm going to make it a kind of interactive workshop and then a Q&A where we'll do some version of this, and they'll get what they get, and I will do a good job from my perspective. And if somebody will like it and somebody won't, that's all right.
You're more of a collaborator than an instructor. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I don't. The older a person gets, I think one should realize less and less the older you get. This, right? My job is to pour a little, hot grow on their brains of these kids, and then wherever they go, they go.
Yeah.
And also I tell them early on, like, I don't want this class to be hard for you or me. I want it to be fun, because I deeply believe that good, creative stuff, learning, everything happens in a state of loose funness. Like, that's my whole approach. And I get good reviews for that reason, but I'm tired of it.
I get that, man. Well, yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure that the event will go well. I'm sure they'll be glad to have you. So until we talk again, I guess we can go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you're welcome to send follow-up questions, or we can do this again. Like, I like talking process. I really like talking process much more than any kind of lecture. I can't do that, but I can bullshit about process and deeply believe it for a long time. And you might have other questions after you see my stuff if you can make it through it.
Oh yeah, I would love to do this again.
Sure.
You know,
Let me know whenever.
yeah, I don't know how busy of a dude you are, but I would love for you to be on here definitely more than once. Like, I'd love to have you on here a few times.
Yeah, no, I don't go back to teaching until fall. And even when I'm teaching, this kind of thing energizes me, as opposed to a campus class experience doesn't really, but this would be fun. I do this anytime you want.
Awesome.
Thanks, Tyler, for all the great questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Get to work now. Work on some songs.
That's what I'm gonna do.
Bye-bye.
See ya.